My name's Braeden, Pockets Regno. We're in the Vibe Cave in Vancouver, Canada, and this is SoundProof. So what inspired me to do sound engineering during like that initial time? I was going back and forth to university. And I was quickly becoming less interested with what I was going to university for. And on the way there, I was listening to this one record over and over again. It was the Mother, Mother, Oh My Heart album. And I went from going like, oh, this is a great record to like, how did they do that? I was doing bits of recording myself as like a sax player with some friends and stuff, but we're just messing around. And yeah, it went from like, okay, hold on, there's this whole other side of music that I could get into that I don't know about. Let's see what that is like as a career. And I just started like doing a bunch of research. And then at the end of a semester, I was like, hey, I'm not going to continue going to like this school anymore. I got to go to Vancouver and do something that I haven't talked about with you guys, like my folks at all. Are you cool with that? And then made a hard switch and moved to Vancouver. My first experience in the studio is probably one when I was actually going to school. I went to Nimbus and I have this very fond memory of having my hands in my pockets, being super anxious, no idea what I was doing whatsoever. And one of the owners just started yelling at me to like, do stuff, you're in a studio, get your hands out of your pockets, start playing with stuff. And I'm like, holy crap. And I'm just like turning knobs. I have no idea what's going on. That's probably like the very first one. High anxiety, zero knowledge, right in the middle of it off the top. And someone's barking at me to start doing things. It worked though. Yeah.
Is that how you got your
nickname? Yeah, partially. It's one where I started having that nickname from it was Garth Richardson who was calling me that and started calling me Pockets, and another teacher also named Garth who is still calling me that. We just call him Futch. And my name started being misspelled on albums and records I was doing. And before I didn't really give a crap. At this point, it was like, oh, hold on, this is really important to me going forward. This needs to be spelled right. So I started throwing the Pockets thing in, partially as like, hey, that's a decent nickname. I've had worse. And as like a litmus test almost of like, if you truly gave a crap about me, you'd spell my name right. So if you misspell my first and last name, but get Pockets right, at least, you know, we got that far. So that's kind of like a couple of things. I got to have something I can search myself by later on. And then, yeah, it was just kind of a cool monkey at the time. How do I prepare? Well, that's for each session, that's going to be pretty different. I mean, it's varied. If it's an artist I've been with before, there's a good chance that I'm already going to be familiar with their workflow and their influences of stuff, because it really just comes down to like a ton of research. If this is a new artist, like I've got a brand new client coming in tomorrow, I don't know much about their music. I need to sit down and just listen and figure out what they've done before, what they might be influenced by, and some stuff so I can get familiar. Every artist I need to do that with, or else I'm kind of coming in blind, which is not the best. Best case scenario is we end up with a phenomenal recording, and that's everything I'm researching for. It's like, how do I make sure that this works well? Is this person high anxiety? Are they very trusting? What kind of vibe do they carry into the room so I can adapt? Because it's really about getting the performance from them. So a bunch of research and preparation is the main thing every time, of just like doing some hunting, going through their socials, checking out their Spotify, seeing what's up. Worst case scenarios are hard to prepare for, because usually the worst case is not something that you could have like fathomed. If it's something you're prepared for, it's probably not going to be worst case. It's just, Oh man, worst case Ontario is going to have to be just like rolling with the punches on stuff. If things continue to just keep working against you, it's how you kind of make up for it to finish the session. Worst case is that we don't get anything good recorded, or the artist gets really upset or something, and those are hard to prepare for. By doing all of that other research and stuff I mentioned prior, then I'll set myself up so that doesn't happen. But also at this case, if someone comes in to work with me, usually they're vetted at this point. It's not just random artists. So I know that this person and I are going to work well together. And right from the get-go, I can prevent kind of the worst case stuff. Illnesses happen. If someone's feeling really not right for recording, or their voice is starting to go or something, that just happens. That's part of recording. But worst case gets avoided at this point just from working with great artists. Yeah, makes it easier. From working my time at music retail, I got really good at like troubleshooting people's setups all the time to different degrees and making plans of stuff. So it's kind of like a little like tree in my mind of like, okay, I have all of these options, and then these options require this work, and some of this is feasible and some of this is not. So it's kind of just a moment of like sitting there and like, hold on, let me get A, B, C as backups, and then just like start getting them working. If this computer dies, I've got that other laptop. If this microphone breaks, I've got something else. Like having redundancy for things kind of prevents, like I've got an immediate option B that I can just go with. But yeah, it just kind of makes like a little map in a tree in my head, and I'm like, okay, I got to follow this process to be able to fix this, and how do I get going? And luckily, that's gotten really easy because of having to deal with a ton of other people's bullshit. Yeah, you get thrown every conceivable variation in music retail when you're talking with like working with people. It's like trying to get something working. And luckily that's given me like a really big like suite of options and ideas to pull from based on previous crap. um yeah, for mixing, it's kind of like, I think all great mixing engineers are amalgamation of their experiences with other mixing engineers and their mentors and research and stuff. And I'm kind of the same way. I kind of view my mixing as a voice leader approach. So I find the thing that's like most important. What's driving the mid range of the track, or what's driving like the bass? Is it like the kick or the low end? Is it a vocal or a guitar? Like what's the most important thing in that range? And then often building around that. So sometimes it starts in the drums, sometimes it starts in the vocal, sometimes it starts with a crazy synth or something that needs to be kind of the most important thing for the song. And it's just kind of taking a look at that and making decisions on mixing based around it. From there, then it's like I said, amalgamation of like all the other techniques and things, like a really big reservoir that I can pull from of stuff to try, and hopefully just make the song sound like the way it needs to be, the best version of itself. So how do I go about communicating with artists? It's a bit of a funny one because it does change person to person so much. It just depends on what they need. I try and be really, really receptive to like what's going on with a person at that time, and setting ourselves up for like making sure they're coming in to do good work. Obviously, if we're trying to work on a happy song and they're coming in really depressed or things are happening, sometimes that session can help a lot for them and they'll liven up. Other times it's like, we need to come back around to this when, you're feeling better. So the communication is really just like constantly paying attention to the artist, adapting what I need to do for them. Sometimes it's taking the lead because they're quite nervous. Sometimes it's being more subdued because I can be quite boisterous at times and they're much more mellow, and then kind of matching that and following it. So some artists are very upfront and like to be blunt. Others you have to be a little bit more careful with. But when I bring an artist into the studio and I'm working with them as like a producer or a mixing engineer or whatever, I usually have a chance to talk to them, and doing that work beforehand to just like have a Zoom call or have them come down to the studio and hang out for a bit gives me a great idea of kind of what they're going to be like when they come into the room with me. And that makes that whole communication thing easier because I've kind of got a little bit of not a script, but like a little bit of a plan of how to approach that person and their art. Sometimes when you're translating music, it's not particularly clear. But again, that research, just more talking to them openly about like, hey, what are our goals? Setting that from the top of like, where are we trying to get to? Like, what is your not necessarily like vision for the song, but what's going to make you the most stoked? What you want to feel, things like that. So when the miscommunication arises, hopefully it'll be a little bit easier to deal with. But then if they're, you know, people make mistakes. Usually it's like, oh, I didn't want that kind of sound. I go, okay, boop, and I just mute it. So it's like, oh, you didn't want it that much reverb? Oh, my bad. I thought we were going for something a little bit more swimmy or whatever. Cool, no problem. Drier. Boop, let's change, like turn it off, done. And then we just keep going.
Okay.
Phenomenal artist named Balam. I did a session with him just in the cusp of coming out of some COVID stuff, just when we were opening back up. A lot of musicians hadn't played before. We had him and his whole band working on a terrific song, and it needed to be very much live with everybody communicating. He was in the center. We had these people, like we had percussion and everything. And the challenge was like letting him communicate with all the artists in the exact way that he needs to, because Blam knows what he wants, and that's fantastic. And then still ensuring that the sound is going to be correct. So we had multiple percussionists, horns, a full suite of bands. And in Rain City Recorders, where we did this session, this was before our recent reno, I didn't have quite as much isolation and communication. So it was just a balance of like, okay, making sure everything still sounds tight, but everyone can see each other, talk to each other, and make sure that we get the exact product. Because a lot of people hadn't been around others for months, and it kind of showed. So it was like dealing with people, dealing with sound, tons of everybody around, still trying to be safe too, and then getting a soulful, impactful recording. So that was just like a lot of things I had to deal with at the same time, a lot of variables on top of just trying to make sure it sounds great. Yeah. So how I stay up to date with like advancements and stuff is just being open to like a lot of the news and stuff. I'm a big nerd, so it's like learning about a new synth or some other change or adaptation or like industry advancement. I've got like a number of different news sources and magazines and stuff that I kind of follow for it. I've got friends that are also really big nerds too, so we chat and like share stuff. Oh, did you hear about this company doing this thing? How do they do that crazy stuff? And while I don't always adopt it really fast, I'm at least like aware of it, so when I'm ready I can find the right spot for my workflow for things. So it's kind of like talking to people that I really, really trust, reading stuff like a website called Tape Op, or a magazine called Tape Op that's been around for a really long time, is huge. And then kind of like researching interviews between some of my favorite people that are doing fantastic work. Like, what are things that are commonly that are coming up over and over again with people that are doing like enviable, high quality work that I want to try and match. And then, and then just nerding out and trying to figure out if I can afford it or not. Yeah.
Nice.
So how I adapt like older technology and stuff, older technology and older sounds or materials is, I think, just trying to be really aware of the options a sound can bring. So I have like old percussion and some old synths and certain things that are very musical. So I'm listening for like musicality on stuff. Sometimes something that is like really weirdly out of pitch is only going to be useful for a couple of things. Other stuff is going to be like a really pure sound that I can add to the repertoire of like that's more varied. It's just experimenting. It's trying to say like, oh, I can hear this go a bunch of different ways, like that tone or that percussive hit or that thing, and that sound will spark like an idea of other music. So if a sound is instantly like musically inspiring, then that's a great thing. If I hear a tone and go, oh, that could be a thing, and I'm like, all right, well, is that a one-off random piece of sound that I can never replicate again? Or is that like a cool synth I've never heard of, or like a weird patch from a vintage keyboard, or bizarre stuff I can try and work in? But all of those things, if we're talking hardware, comes with their own challenges. So some of it is like, well, I just can't afford to like fix this back to the way I can use it, but it's really neat. So I'll keep it as like a display piece or something. And it's a mix. It's always a balance of like how perfect does the sound need to be for the record versus like how cool can it be in the context of like a different kind of song, like just track by track depending. So how I manage my tasks is a combination of like little mental thought bubbles, which isn't always the best, and sticky notes. Like I just have there's some somewhere. Oh, they're over there. I just have pads of sticky notes where I need to write something down. If I don't write something down, I don't remember it as well. Like names, anything that I need to like make sure to do, even like just little tasks. I don't have to look at the sticky note. I can just, as long as I write it down, it works better. So it's kind of like, okay, today I need to do, but before I leave for the day, I'll usually write what I need to do the next day. So I can walk in, put my stuff down, turn the computer and everything else on, and I know exactly what I need to bring up first. As long as I set myself up to do something like that, I can be really effective. But like many, I can totally just go like browsing. It's been 20 minutes and you're like, oh, but gotta get to work. So sticky notes are a huge aspect, and just making sure I write it down. Yeah. Glad I figured that out about myself. So for confidentiality and security, it really depends on the artist. Some are constantly taking video of content that has the music in the background or the hook, and it's up to them. If they want to be really precious about something, then absolutely. For like a higher tier artist that maybe has like quite a bit of funding, or the release is going to be very specific, it's really just asking them, like setting it up, because everybody loves social media. Everyone loves a good photo, but some people don't even want to be known that they're in that room with you, either because they have fans that'll show up, which is like happened and is awkward, or is they want to keep their creative process to themselves. But like in my initial conversations with artists, I kind of like float some of that. Like, yeah, is it cool if I grab some photos? Oftentimes they're the ones asking me, "Is like, it's okay if I post this video of us working?" And I'm like, yes, please, as long as you tag me. Come on, like I'll only be chapped if you release that and you don't even like tag me anywhere. Come on. I see different genres of music as kind of like chemistry or baking. You kind of learn the rules of each of these ingredients or like flavor sets, and some of them work really well with others, and some of them are much harder to make something that's going to be like flavorful when you're using them together. I bill myself as like a fusion producer or a slash producer. The more like genres or other bands you keep tagging on that you sound like, kind of the more interested I get. So when it comes down to like blending stuff, it's like, okay, well, I know that I can take, the bass, or I can take like Afro beats and I can put it with hip hop really easily, obviously, right? That's one that's just a super common thing. But then it's been like in industrial metal with industrial metal with like metal hip hop style. That's a bit of a harder one to make crossover. It's very particular. Some things are really well, like soul and R&B and groove based things are always easy to put in there. Jazz is easy to work into stuff at times to make stuff a bit jazzy. So it's kind of like, oh, certain flavors work really well with a lot of things, and the elements of them do. Other stuff is just like, it's going to end up clashing for one reason or the other. So it's experimenting with more combinations of things gives me the experience to know like, oh, this flavor is going to work better with this flavor if I get asked. Or how do I go about making sure that those two things that might not make sense together end up being really, really cool? Because as long as it sounds cool and we can go like, oh, that's rad, we're good. That's all we really need sometimes. One of my favorite successful projects is probably going to be KimMortal's record, their first record. Working with them uh, allowed me to level up in a way that I wasn't aware of, like at working as a producer and building a song from the ground up with them. To be on have a couple of tracks on their first record was massive. It's something that I can still lean on a few years later and say I did this quality of work that sounds fantastic, because Kim themselves work so hard with their music and constantly are creating amazing stuff. So to say, hey, I've got a couple of productions on there first thing is fantastic. And that's allowed me to kind of just like, hey, I can do this level of cool stuff. And then everything kind of been, making steps from there, which has been fantastic. I don't think I contributed to the success of the record. That's all Kim, but I love the songs on it. And I think it makes it a cooler experience to listen to that album front to back with my tracks on it. Yeah. I always kind of like with ensuring the quality is staying there, the process is very much, it's kind of like the research thing I mentioned with artists. Like if I'm going to make sure that my recording process between like each session is going to be really clean or good, it's making sure I know some of the rules of that genre coming in. So like I mentioned, like we've got some flavors and stuff with that particular artist. So if we're doing R&B things, I've experimented with R&B tracks in a bunch of different ways. I've tried to get different tones or sounds or rhythms or whatever that would be that kind of genre. So for me, it's like I need to experiment with stuff constantly. I try and take time for like learning my new tools, learning my old ones in different ways, and maximizing kind of what I've got. I got a lot of cool stuff, but everything here, I know what I can get out of it. And I'm working to like exhaust all of those sounds. So it's like the best way to ensure consistent recordings and things are awesome and sounding great is trying different stuff, knowing what works before, that major session comes in. Understand that, you could make all these different sounds happen based on what you've got in the room. A lot of experimentation. If I'm trying to keep like artists' artistic vision to technical capabilities, largely it just comes down to some budget. It's just scaling it. So it's like the technical capabilities of like, we can always scale up. If it's not something I can do here, we go to another studio, and that happens all the time. If we need a very particular space with a particular sound, I can usually find it, access it, and figure out what it's going to cost to get us in there. And it's almost always just comes down to like the technical aspect. If you want to experiment on snare drums like Michael Jackson did for 2 weeks to get the right sound on the 4th beat, we can. Let's do it. Maybe. But like, you need to understand how much it's going to cost. Like we can absolutely do it if you have Michael Jackson money, but otherwise it's like we need to find that amazing snare sound in a bit of a quicker time and maybe not use a whole studio for it and all this other stuff. So the technical aspects are like, okay, well, it's kind of only limited to my creative vision. If I don't understand like what they've got artistically, I'm probably not going to understand it technically. I can try and figure out how to remake sounds or certain things that they want. But it really comes down to like how much budget we have for things that require it, or just how much time I can dedicate to experimenting with their thing. Usually I see it as a challenge. So it's rare they're like, oh, if I want to get the sound of like something ridiculous, they're like, how do I get there? Like, this is cool. Like, all right, sure. Give me a second. Let me try and figure this out. Give me a little bit. There's a really fun story with the Grateful Dead, and I need to clarify this rumor. So if anyone's watching this and they're like, that's not how it happened, let me know. Is that they were working on their first album, and in the studio, I guess after like a couple of weeks of harassing this engineer, went up to him and was like, hey man, can you give us the sound of Heavy Air? And the story is that he just like got up, got his jacket and everything, and just quit and just left, like working for the studio, period, because he was an in-house guy. And he just quit and he just never went back. And I love that, because I'm thinking like, man, that guy must have gotten really frustrated after a bit, because I got like 4 different ways we can achieve the sound of Heavy Air in like 30 seconds. Let's give that a try. And the technical aspects are kind of gone these days with computers and stuff. We can do whatever the hell we want within reason, you know?
I feel like that's kind of like, maybe that is Heavy Air. As soon as he quit.
Yeah, that's the sound of Heavy Air right there.
Air.
What's the sound of Heavy Air? Your engineer being tired of your shit and just leaving. But again, I have to imagine if it's Grateful Dead, there was a lot of other stuff going on in that studio that probably frustrated the guy. So, hey, I wasn't there. I can't comment on it, but I know how I want to get Heavy Air. Let's do it.